Thank you, Madam President and members. Earlier this year, I went with my county on the homeless counts in Contra Costa County. And on that early morning hour, we stopped at a park in Martinez. And there I met Dina and John, who were living in their car. And I talked to them about their circumstances, and they explained to me that their rent had been raised almost 80% in the past year, and they couldn't afford it. And they had no choice but to leave their apartment and to live in their car with their cat. And they were there at that park in Martinez that very cold winter morning to get some hot coffee and some cereal and some juice that was being provided by a Good Samaritan who would provide that a couple days a week along with a prayer. Later that morning, we traveled to an underpass in Walnut Creek, and I met Robert. Had a little fire going because he was cold. Didn't have a sleeping bag, anything to sleep with. And I talked to Robert to ask about his circumstance, and Robert said that he was married and living in Moraga, very affluent community, and unfortunately he got a divorce and he ran into health problems, and so he lost everything, and there he was in the cold with the little fire with his dog under an overpass in Walnut Creek. And I know that the story of Dina and John and Robert is not unique to our communities, our neighborhoods, our state. It's a problem that I think we acutely feel in this Senate about the problems of housing, affordable housing, and homelessness. So when we talk about an issue like this, what can we do to make our state better, more affordable housing available? I know we all think about the Dinas and the Johns out there and whether this is a good thing to do. And when we're presented with bills such as this, the first question that I ask is, okay, what's the problem that we're trying to solve with this piece of legislation? Why is this the right pathway to doing the things that we know are important to us? And in examining that question, it became very apparent to me that there was a problem here in really not identifying a problem. In my Senate district, I have 10 BART stations comprising 7 towns. And I asked all of the mayors of those towns and all the city managers, can you tell me what you have done to stop BART from developing on their parking lots in your community? Have you turned down BART applications and why? And so I went to each of those cities to ask that question to justify this bill. And in every case, they said to me, Steve, in the last 10 years, we have not turned down a BART housing project on their parking lot. None, 0. And I said, okay, but hold on a second. I'm sure there must have some applications pending from BART. So could you tell me where those are in the process and why you're holding them up? And in every case, they said, Steve, we don't have an application from BART to build on their parking lot. There's no applications here. And I said, well, they're claiming that they can't build affordable housing on their parking lots, so why is there a problem here? And each city then detailed to me what they had done to build affordable housing in and around BART. And it was, I have to tell you, a very impressive list. I want to share some of them with you. In the city of Concord, they've entitled over 2,500 housing units within a half-mile radius of downtown Concord BART. 2,500 units, almost 4,400 within a mile. And if you know Concord in the next 10 years is going to be building more housing than any city of its size anywhere in the state because of the donation of the Naval Shipyard to the city and their plans for thousands and thousands of units. But somehow Concord now is part of the problem. I asked the city mayor of Antioch, what are you doing to build housing around transit? You have a new BART stop there. And they said our specific plan that we've approved provides 2,500 high-density transit-oriented development units around our BART station. And we've totally collaborated with BART. I went to the city of Pittsburgh that has 2 BART stations, and I said, hey guys, so BART hasn't come to you to build? No. BART has no applications to build? No. So what are you doing to build affordable housing? And here's what the city mayor said to me. Passed a master plan in 2011 allowing 1,100 residential units, including 252 high density around the BART station. BART has land there, but he's never developed it. Never put forward a plan to develop it. And in the last 20 years, private developers have developed 1,250 units around the BART station. They have a second station in Pittsburgh. Once again, passed a specific plan for allowing 1,845 additional units, 1,600 within a half mile of BART. BART hasn't participated in this process whatsoever. There was some testimony in committee earlier this year that criticized the city of Dublin for turning down 200 units on BART property. 200 units on BART property. So I talked to the folks in Dublin, and they told me many things I already knew, which is that they've zoned for development in the BART area in the hundreds and thousands of units, that Dublin is known as the fastest growing city in California for the last 5 years because they have produced thousands of units of housing in Dublin. And then I got the news that the reason this bill was necessary was because towns like Dublin couldn't do any more because they had a member of the city council under recall because they voted for high density housing. So now I see that. You want courage from council members. There's a recall against one of them, and that's a reason why you can't trust Dublin to do their part on affordable housing. And the kicker on this story of what cities are doing or not doing was the city of Pleasanton. The city of Pleasanton, because not only has the city of Pleasanton zoned and constructed thousands of units of housing around their BART station, but this past year, on a piece of BART property that had been zoned for multifamily housing, BART came to them and said, hey, we've changed our mind. We need you to take that parcel for multifamily housing and we need you to rezone it for commercial housing, commercial property. We've made this 99-year deal with Workday, and we'd like to take off the books the multifamily and turn it into commercial housing. So when I look around my district for where the problem is, it's not very apparent to me. And certainly BART has not been very apparent in any of their desires to build on their so-called parking lots. And what I have seen in place are these cities that have taken very courageous action, because it's not easy to do, to zone, approve, construct thousands and thousands of homes around BART stations. If you look in the analysis today on this bill, it has a section about land use, and it's very poignant. It's on page 8. And it points out that the California Constitution specifically grants cities and counties the exclusive ability among local governments to exercise police power, which form the basis of local regulation of land use. It says California has developed a complex system of planning based on the premise that cities and counties are the agencies with this authority. And it points out that this bill before us today upends this system by taking land use decisions out of the hands of cities and counties and giving it to another local government by telling cities and counties they have to adopt BART standards. And it says that granting land use authority to a local government sets a significant precedent, and they are absolutely right. The Constitution set these parameters about how development happens. And it's certainly clear to me that if this legislation passes today, that we're going to have a constitutional challenge. We're going to have public agencies spending millions of dollars fighting other public agencies with the right to implement the bill that's before us today. Now, there is a significant precedent being set by this. Hundreds of special districts in California, none of them have been given the power that this bill suggests. None of them. And there are many who would love to have this power, take it away from cities and counties. If BART was to build out what's allowed under this bill, the units, over the next 20 years, it would add up to less than a fraction of what's required in California, a fraction. So you say on one hand, well, it's something. On the other hand, folks, That's the precedent that's been set. If you have a Metro Rail or a Metrolink stop in your district, if you have transit locations that are in high use, well then welcome to the club, because this legislation can come your way as well. Give those transportation authorities the same right that's being proposed in this legislation. It sets a very, very dangerous precedent. Now, one of the things that this bill establishes is that the land use choices are no longer made in your town. So your city council members that leave their home each day and interact with their residents, the grocery store, at the coffee shop, at the gas station, when they want to come and testify about their concerns before you, usually in the evening, you're accessible and it's available to you. Under this legislation, if BART wants to develop in Pittsburgh, what does that city resident do in Pittsburgh? Well, they probably have to get on a BART train or get in their car and drive a half an hour to the BART headquarters in Oakland, go up to a high-rise to testify when they're going to decide the quality of your community with the project that they're proposing. I asked a leader in Pittsburgh to share his thoughts with me, and he said this. He said, Pittsburgh is a blue-collar, working-class community. The majority of our residents are minorities. Pittsburgh has, on its own, approved the development of 1,000 affordable housing units in the past 15 years. And many of our residents fall into income categories that qualifies them for affordable housing and have been vocal during the project entitlement process. This bill forces Pittsburgh residents to go to BART headquarters in Oakland to express their concerns about this bill and its guidelines. As a result, this bill creates a significant inconvenience, if not an injustice, to our community and others like it. And in Richmond, the mayor of Richmond says this about the bill. 2923 is not what cities need to tackle the housing shortage in the Bay Area. Richmond has already upzoned all of our areas adjacent to BART, all of our areas. And thanks to support from the state, we're breaking ground on more affordable housing for our residents. Making a transit agency responsible for housing development is not the answer. The way to build more housing is by working collaboratively with local jurisdictions, and AB 2923 runs counter to that effort. And that's right, my friends. The communities that need affordable housing the most are the ones that get stepped on by this legislation. The Pittsburghs, the Antiochs, the Concords, in this unprecedented power shift. And believe me, this legislation is all about power. One of the biggest challenges of being a member of this Senate, and I'm sure it's not unique to me, is that we come up here to this floor to meet each other and to learn from each other. And one of the things that I think we all learn, I certainly have learned, is how different we are. Our backgrounds, our experiences, our communities, our people. Bakersfield is different than Santa Monica. And San Diego is different than Concord. And you look all around the state and all the people that we represent, there's a lot of differences. And part of the challenge of the job that we have here is to walk in someone else's shoes too, to try to understand their own experiences and their community's interests. And this job is an incredible honor. And it comes with enormous power. And one of the hardest things that we have to control in our positions here in the Senate is the exercise of that power. It's the ability to show restraint when it is so easy to assert it. And for me, the toughest part of this job is when you get well-intentioned bills before you to say, I appreciate what you're trying to do. I know it's with a good heart, but it's not there today for me. That decision to vote no today. It certainly has been the hardest part of my job here in the Senate. There's a person under great distress who made the remark, can we all get along? He had every reason to be angry. He had every reason to be bitter. And for some reason, he found the grace of God and said those words, can we all get along? We are so much better here in the Senate. We are so much better here in the legislature as a state, as a nation, when we find ways to build partnerships, provide compromise, accommodation, collaboration, that's what brings out the best in our lawmaking. But the bill that's before us does none of those things, my friend. It's a sledgehammer. It tramples the rights of towns and cities with no good reasons. It's unprecedented in scope, stifles community engagement, increases distrust and animosity. I plead with you, let's do our great work together to support affordable housing in the state. We've taken many steps in the last few years to do just that. This bill today is not a good answer. Dina and John, who are living in a car in Martinez, I know are counting on us to do the right thing, to do our best work. And I certainly feel an obligation in my heart to do just that. But this bill before us today isn't right, isn't fair, and we have to look for a better way. With that, I urge a no vote.